Well, hello, everybody. This is Rabbi Dan Levin, and this is Essential Questions. Rabbi Louis Finkelstein once said, "When I pray, I talk to God, but when I study, God talks to me." In the Talmud, when the rabbis sit down to talk about what is the most important verse in the Torah, a rabbi named Ben Azai says it comes from the book of Genesis in chapter 5. When God created humanity, God made them in God's image. We talk about that all the time, this idea that humanity is created in God's image, that we are fashioned in B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God. And when I think about what it means to be created in God's image, one of the most important things that makes us human is our capacity to consider the meaning of our own existence. This is something that my dog does not do. We can think about the purpose of our lives. We can ask the essential question, what are we doing here? We are given this amazing gift called life, a fleeting and holy and precious gift. And we can ask ourselves, what do we want to do with it? And a second concept is that we can think about what it means to be good. We can exercise restraint and forbearance. We can make conscious, deliberate, and thoughtful choices about what we will or won't do. We can make a choice to say, I want to do that, but I won't because it's wrong. Or we can make a choice to say, I don't really want to do that, but I will because it's right. For centuries, one of the most important Jewish undertakings to try to figure out what it means to be created in God's image is to engage in a deep and methodical process of learning. When a child turns 3, the tradition was to give the child a slate and to put a dollop of honey on it so that learning would be sweet. We value learning and literacy above almost everything else. But over the centuries, the purpose of learning has changed. Abraham Joshua Heschel wrote, "Our age is one in which usefulness is thought to be the chief merit of nature, in which the attainment of power, the utilization of its resources, is taken to be the chief purpose of humanity in God's creation. The Greeks learned in order to comprehend, the Hebrews learned in order to revere. Modern humanity learns in order to use. We teach children how to measure, how to weigh. We fail to teach them how to revere, how to sense wonder and awe." And today, so much about learning is about utility. I remember so many conversations with my kids while they were in high school and even in college. Why do I have to learn that? I'm never going to use it. And I've heard so many people disparage liberal arts education because what do I need to learn the classics or literature or art? For Jews, learning was not about knowing useful things. For us, learning was about cultivating awe and wonder, about exploring the meaning of life and the world. Learning was about playing around with the divine, about listening for what God had to say, about how to maximize our experience of what it is to be human, and how to fashion a world that was more in tune with the wavelengths on which God's energy flows through the universe. And so today, we are blessed to explore how Jewish learning can transform our consciousness, awareness, and life with Rabbi Laila Haas. A talented teacher and an innovative leader, Rabbi Haas began her tenure at Temple Beth in June of this year, bringing a passion for Jewish life and Jewish learning. Rabbi Haas spent the first 7 years of her career as the associate rabbi at Temple Emmanuel in Birmingham, Alabama. During her tenure there, Rabbi Haas built a robust adult education program, helped to develop and implement an innovative curriculum for their religious school, and founded the Discovery School, Temple Emmanuel's preschool, which grew to more than 90 students in just its second year. Beginning in 2018, Rabbi Haas served as Director of Adult Learning and Growth at the Center for the Advancement of Jewish Education in Miami. There, she created a new strategic vision for adult learning and growth for the entire Miami Jewish community, helping to grow attendance by more than 20% each year. She led her agency's response to the COVID pandemic, quickly pivoting to provide learning and engagement opportunities online, providing a vital lifeline to hundreds of people who were suffering from loneliness. Rabbi Haas grew up locally in Miami Beach and graduated from the University of Miami. She also earned a Master's of Educational Administration from Xavier University and her ordination from the Hebrew Union College. Rabbi Haas, it is so great to have you with us for Essential Questions today, and even more exciting to have you on our clergy team at Temple Beth.
I'm so thrilled to be here. It's just such a joy, and have been feeling the Bethel love and enjoying getting to know everybody and being part of this incredible team.
So tell us a little bit about your journey. When did you first encounter Jewish learning, and when did that become a passion?
Jewish learning to me came alive when I was in first grade at the Lehrman Day School. My teacher was Miriam Zolden. And I'll never forget, Miss Miriam sat at the top of her desk and she always had a Diet Coke by her side. And I'll never forget, she opens up a book and in it is this beautiful tree. And she showed us the picture of the tree. And she said to all of us, "This is the story of our people." And I remember just staring at this picture of a tree, and it had these beautiful apples on it, and it was growing beautiful flowers at the base of it. And she said, "Judaism is a living, breathing tree. It provides us oxygen. It provides us shade when we need it. It provides us a place to climb and play. And it becomes a place that sustains us and nurtures us." And then she started to tell us about our ancestors and that we as a people are the limbs of this tree and our roots are deep in the soil. That was the moment that I fell in love with Jewish study and Jewish learning.
That's amazing. Most people don't look back to Jewish learning in first grade as their number one experience. For me, it's funny. I liked religious school. I got in trouble a lot in religious school, but I liked it, especially when we were exploring kind of deeper topics. I don't think I got really fascinated, though, until like high school years. And really in college years, that was sort of when things really kind of took off for me. So beyond your first grade experience, can you think of like when you had that first experience of learning that where the sophistication kind of exploded for you, where you had that moment of like, aha, like, wow, like that blow your mind kind of experience when you encounter something in Jewish learning?
I was sitting in our classroom in Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion, and our Jerusalem campus. And my classroom was situated where we had this beautiful window, and outside the window were the walls of the old city of Jerusalem. And I would positioned myself to sit in that corner. Everyone sort of gets their seats fairly quickly, and you like name your spot for the year that you'll be entrenched in this academic pursuit. And for me, it didn't matter truly at that point what text was in front of me, because the text was living for me outside of that window. Every time I opened up a book of Torah, every time we opened up Talmud or a Mishnah or a Midrash, didn't matter truly to me at that moment. It was the blend of those experiences of having these incredibly enriching academic conversations within this defined classroom space, but then watching as it came to life in a transformative and powerful way by knowing that we were part of a continuing conversation that began in antiquity. And I was watching those hills and looking at that dust and that earth and knowing that our ancestors walked there and were having and engaging in these kinds of same conversations, utilizing the same text. And now we were bringing it to life in our modern lens in a way that we were wrestling and challenging it. Torah is always the book that I go back to. For me, we have such a rich, obviously a rich compilation of text from our tradition. But for me, Torah is the compass. It helps to provide me perspective, direction, guidance. Wherever I am and whatever I'm doing, whatever I'm seeking or searching for, I can open up the book of Torah and I for sure am going to find something rich in there. One of the things I love when I think about a sort of a fundamental text for me is that the first question in the Torah is Ayeka. Where are you? How often do we actually ask ourselves, where are we? But how important is that question? God asked that question to Adam. Ayeka, where are you? And Adam doesn't answer right away. He's hiding. And so too in our own lives. Like there are times where we find that we need to hide ourselves. We need to conceal ourselves from the challenges or the realities of what's happening in the world in our own lives. But we can find groundedness, centeredness in actually posing that question to ourselves every morning.
I think about how important that space is where what's happening in front of you in the text and the interplay between that and the environment. When I first started doing serious Jewish learning, I was by accident a philosophy and religion major, and I ended up in Israel. And they said, anybody who wants to learn more about their Judaism, come to this program on Wednesday night. It was called the Beit Midrash program. I didn't know what a Beit Midrash was. I had never heard that term, but I did want to know more about my Judaism. And they introduced me to Rabbi Josh Beretsky. Josh had grown up in Montreal as a secular Jew. After college, grabbed a backpack, was wandering through Europe, ended up at the Western Wall in Jerusalem on Friday afternoon. And this guy says to him, do you have anywhere to stay? Do you have anywhere to eat? And he says no to both of those answers. And he says, well, why don't you stay with me and have Shabbat? And he never left Jerusalem.
Mm.
And he became my chavruta, my study partner. And the place where we would have our Beit Midrash, our learning study, was the sanctuary of the Hecht Synagogue at the Hebrew University. So at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, which sits on a hill called Mount Scopus, literally the mountain of views, there's a view.
There's a view.
And the amazing thing about the Hecht Synagogue is there's, on the southern facing wall, there is a huge window that faces the Temple Mount in the Old City. The sanctuary actually faces south because you're in the north part of Jerusalem. And so as you pray there, out the window is the Temple Mount and the city of Jerusalem before you. I can so resonate to that experience that you had in rabbinical school because that's kind of where I fell in love with Torah also. But for me, the interesting thing was I remember that very first night that we were studying. He opens up the book of Exodus and he says, let's read 1:1. Okay. These are the names of the children of Israel who went to Egypt with Jacob. And he says, stop. And I'm like, what? Did I read it wrong? He's like, don't you see what's there? And I'm like, what are you talking about? And we spent an hour and a half on that verse. Who is Jacob and who is Israel? And why do you need the part of you that is sort of the conniving, manipulating part, which is Jacob, and the proud, God-wrestling part of you that is Israel? And why do you need both when you go to a place called Egypt, which in Hebrew is called Mitzrayim, the narrow places? And what does that mean about who you are and your journeys when you enter into narrow places? And what does it mean to be in a narrow place? And is it narrow-minded or is it just narrow thinking? And all from like just a few words. And I was just blown away that you could have an hour and a half conversation over just a few words, that there was so much richness in a text that frankly, I wouldn't have even stopped reading because I didn't think that was the important part. So you talk about this text that you have from the book of Genesis where God says to Adam, Ayeka. What is Torah for you, though? Is it just the 5 books? Is it just sort of what we think of as that big rolled up book in the Ark? When you think about what Torah is, what's magical about it? What happens when we study Torah?
So Rabbi Jonathan Sacks taught that Torah is God's book of humanity, and each of us is a chapter in its unfinished story. Obviously, could not have said it better than Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. But that's truly how I feel. That Torah for me is the window into so many different adventures, places to discover, whether with internally or out into the world. But it's a story. This scroll that has accompanied us throughout the generations is not just a book about facts and figures. It's a living, breathing story. And for us, we are this people of storytellers. And what a magical gift. How better to compel our children to resonate with something of such essence and truth than through the power of telling stories. I mean, I see it with my own child. When we sit down to read a book, his eyes open up, his mind, you're watching this like mind explosion in living time. By telling stories, we start to create a living chain of tradition. And passing down these stories is the richness of how you and I are sitting here today. Sometime, in the future, we can come back to this book, to this story, and it'll feel different. It will come alive to us in so many different ways, even though the words are the same. And to me, that is the richness of what Torah is. And Torah does extend beyond the 5 books for me. Torah is you and I sitting here and engaging in a conversation about what it means to be excited about Jewish learning. We're creating a Torah moment. We're creating this new story, this new chapter in the life of what it means to live Jewishly and see the world through a Jewish lens. To me, Torah is also our liturgy. It's also the prayers that we recite. I was reading a story about Modeh. When we wake up in the morning to offer words of gratitude, if we see the world through gratitude, that's Torah. Right? Like all of a sudden, we're creating Torah moments.
So, Modeh Ani, tell us what are those words? What's your ritual when you wake up? How does that?
So my ritual is to get up early before everybody else in the house. Those are my sacred quiet moments. And traditionally, you recite the words Modeh ani lefanecha, melechai v'kayam, shechazarta binishmati, bechemla, rabba, emunatecha. That we open up our mouths even before we open our eyes, and we express gratitude to God for restoring within us this soul, this amazing element, essence of who we are deep within us. And it's this pure and beautiful soul. And that those first words should be words of gratitude. So I try to do that every single morning before I get up, before I jump up and begin the craziness of the morning, just to have quiet, to express gratitude, not just for my own soul, but the souls of all the people I love, for the world that we've been given, for this opportunity to stand up and engage in it. And as I was thinking about Modeh Ani, and I came across this amazing story about a neurologist who had been studying this incredibly strange phenomenon about people who faint as soon as they get out of bed in the morning. They open their eyes, they get up, and they fall onto the floor. And she was presenting at a conference, at a lecture about the topic. She'd studied in depth for many years. And she came to the conclusion that the fainting phenomenon was a result of actually getting up too quickly. Getting up and jumping out of bed and standing up too quickly, people would faint. And so she came to the conclusion that actually every single person, before they jump out of bed in the morning, should actually sit still in their bed for 12 seconds. That actually restores the blood flow to where it needs to be and provides the opportunity for you to stand up. And there was a professor in the audience who's a Jewish man, and he said, I'd just like to offer some insight that in Judaism, we actually observe this tradition that we recite a prayer every morning to offer thanks, and we're supposed to do so when we're sitting up in bed before we get up. And the prayer is Modeh Ani, and it's actually composed of 12 words. And if you recite these 12 words with intention, it takes approximately 12 seconds. Like, what Torah? That's incredible Torah.
And I think that's part of kind of like what happens when you have these mind-blowing experiences with learning, where it isn't about the book. It's about the connections between these ancient stories and traditions and the contemporary lives that we lead, where all of a sudden you are gifted with an epiphany or a realization about the life that you lead, the wisdom you need, the understanding that you seek about how to answer the questions that are kind of sitting right in front of you. I can think of so many times when I was wondering about something, and then I would come across something in the portion of the week or in something I was preparing, and all of a sudden, embedded in the text you would never have imagined to find it, is the answer, the idea that you were kind of in need to find. When you think about times when you've been learning, are there times where it was like hard, that there were like obstacles where the gears were grinding and it just wasn't working?
My rabbi from growing up, Rabbi Glickstein, used to say, if you have to try too hard, it's not right. And I always think about, in terms of writing a sermon, if you have to try so hard, this wasn't the sermon for you. I think about that often because there are times when there's so much noise, so much distraction in my own head, or so many things going on where your calendar has all those amazing blocks of appointments. It's just one after another, one after another, one after another of all these responsibilities that we have. And the noise becomes overwhelming and the distractions are forefront. That it is hard to find meaning in the text or meaning in the parsha or trying to work too hard to get to the essence of what I'm hoping to say. And I find that it takes practice and it takes effort to quiet the noise and to eliminate some of the distraction in order to find a space of reflection. I've worked hard at trying to develop a meaningful practice of reflection. I learned this when I was actually at the Kellogg Institute for Jewish Leadership, that I had an amazing professor, Harry Kramer, and he talked about how there are these 5 areas that as a leader you have to really work on. And the one area that I was really moved by was his ritual of reflection. That every day he ended his day by asking himself questions. What did you accomplish today? Where were you good today? What did you do that was meaningful? And what did you need to work on? He asked himself these questions every single day, and he would journal them, he would answer them, and then the next day, he would reflect back on his answers from the day previous and then how he lived his life. And I found that that's been truly helpful to carve out that space. It's not easy. It can easily fall to the low list of priorities, but it's that effort of pushing it back up towards the top that helps to find meaning and purpose in my own life, and something that I hope to model and to also teach. And I think our tradition has so many different ways to remind us to carve out that space for reflection so that we can be open and we can be willing to find meaning in places where it's a little bit harder to find. Often I think about the story of Jacob when Jacob is on his journey and he lays down and he experiences the ladder of the angels going down and up. And when he wakes up, the first thing he said is, God is in this place and I didn't even know it. I was reminded of that as we were asking this question because I think sometimes there is, with everything else that's going in our lives and we're racing and we are, things can be chaotic, or we're working really hard at trying to find meaning and purpose. And sometimes we forget that there is holiness just right around us and to be grateful for the blessings. And God is in this moment. And sometimes it's important to actually stop, pause, and recognize that we can elevate that mundane moment and the craziness and elevate that to the realm of the holy.
When I was a kid, I didn't like to go to bed, and my parents were trying to get rid of this rambunctious, hyper kid. And so they would say, you can read for as late as you want, just stay in your room. And I kind of fell in love with reading when I
Mm.
was a kid, partly because I like to stay up, but partly because reading just kind of fueled me. And even when I wasn't doing my homework, and there were times where I wasn't doing what I was supposed to be doing, I still was reading and learning. And my mom used to say, even when you were totally screwing up in high school, I didn't really worry about you because you were always learning,
Mm.
even if it wasn't what I was assigned to be learning. And in fact, when I was in college, I made a rule for myself that I would always have a pleasure book that I would read a little bit before I went to sleep, even if I hadn't finished all the reading that I needed to do, because I didn't want to lose that love of learning that I had kind of held on to when I was in high school, when I was going through some tough stuff. And even through today, I try to have a book that's sitting on my nightstand, not always one that has something to do with a project or something that I'm doing for this synagogue. Sometimes it's just a book because I just need to have something that touches or fills my mind. But one of the things that I think initially was an obstacle was this idea of thinking about the Torah coming from God. And I remember just not believing that God had a pen. And that when people talked about the Torah coming from God, I just didn't imagine a big, bald, bearded fuzzy in the sky with a feather quill writing down the Ten Commandments. I didn't think that's what Torah was, but I didn't really know kind of how to explain it otherwise. Did you ever have that kind of an experience where you're like, I'm a modern person? What's your sense of what makes the Torah authored by God?
It's so funny that you bring that up. In my first day of rabbinical school at Cincinnati, we had our Bible class. It was with Dr. David Aaron. And he posed this question: who here believes the Torah was written by God? So I'm going to pause there for a second. I grew up in a very Jewish home, meaning Judaism and Jewish life was a part of every aspect, right? We grew up in the synagogue. My father is a cantor emeritus now. And parents, really, everything that we did was imbued with this sense of Jewish content in some way. And I went to a day school, and it was a conservative day school, and God wrote the Torah. Okay. And that was just something that I was taught in my school. This was given by God. It was handed to Moses. It was given to us, and we should cherish it and carry it as this divine gift. So moving forward, I'm sitting in this class in Cincinnati. He asked the question, who here believes the Torah was written by God? And as I'm looking around at everyone and I'm about to like sort of raise my hand is getting ready to lift. He goes, good. Otherwise, I'm kicking you out of rabbinical school. And I'll never
Whoa.
forget that moment of like, come on, people. The Torah wasn't written by God. And I'll never forget that day, because I was thinking that there are ways to see the Torah through different lenses when we need it the most. And so for me, there are moments when that notion of this beautiful moment on the top of Sinai and imagining God and Moses in this incredible conversation and the people at the base of the mountain and the beauty of what that moment must have been like, to hear the thunder, to see the lightning, and then to receive this word, these utterances. And then on the other hand, there are incredible moments where now in Judaism allows us to see it as a document that was written by a human hand and wrestled with and challenged and broken apart, and that from my scholarly lens, I can say this part of Torah doesn't work with this part of Torah, or this line comes back again over here, and why is there a discrepancy? The fact that I can actually tear it apart in some ways through a place of questioning, and there are moments in my life where I just have to say, where are you, God? Or what are you telling me here? Or like the history of this piece is really fascinating to me. And the fact that Judaism creates that space for us, I think, is the most amazing gift that we've been given, is that Jewish learning allows us to see the text through many different lenses, to experience the text through the different moments of our lives, whether they are moments of incredible joy and simcha, or moments of real pain, loss, challenge, disbelief, that our tradition grants us that ability to say, this really makes sense to me, this doesn't make sense to me, or I need this to be something that is spoken directly to me from God. And there are moments in my life where I can recall having all those different experiences. And I think that's what makes Jewish learning so rich, so compelling, so inspiring, so provocative. And that's okay. That we can in one part of our heart, we can say, this is the moment that I just need to know that these words were granted to me from Sinai.
And I think when I was learning about religion and starting to begin this journey for me, I was really in search of trying to figure out a theology that made sense. If I didn't think that God, like I said, was the big, bald, bearded fuzzy in the sky that deals out Tsuris cards depending on how many times you light Shabbat candles, is there something else out there? And I got very lucky when I got to the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. I took a phenomenal course in modern Jewish thought with an amazing teacher and a mentor named Paul Mendesflor. And he introduced me to the writing of Martin Buber, who wrote this very famous book called I and You, or Ich und Du, sometimes translated I and Thou. And what he posits is a very simple idea, which is there's like two ways of looking at the world. I can look at stuff, what he would call I, it. So for example, you look at a chair. What makes it a chair? It has the form and the function of a chair. It has a seat. It has a platform. It has a back. If it was made for two butts, then it would be a bench. It wouldn't be a chair. If it was squishy, it would be a couch, right? And what does a chair do? Well, you can sit on it. You can stand on it. You can use it to hold open a door. You can use it as a weapon. You could use a chair for all different kinds. It has form and it has function. And you could say the same about people, right? People have form. People have function. And this is sort of how we go through the world most of the time. But he says then there's moments where you can move beyond the categorization, the classification of what kind of a person is that? What kind of a chair is that? What does that person do? What is it for? All of those sort of utilitarian things. And open yourself up, and you can be struck by the full essence of what something is and what someone is, beyond their form, beyond their function, to the real core of what makes that person a person. What he taught was that's not called I, it, that's called I, you. And that those moments are precious and defining and transformative and fleeting, and I got it. Because I remembered the first time I had had a conversation with a friend where we stayed up all night talking, and it wasn't about that she was a girl, and it wasn't about the fact that I was a boy, and it wasn't about the fact that she was tall or short or whatever she was. We just sort of connected, and I was probably 14 years old, and I remember that as a transformative experience. And then he said that sometimes with art, people can take these moments of transcendent awareness and they can try to express it in whatever way a human being can, whether it's through art or through music or poetry or literature or storytelling. And if you open yourself up to what that expression is, you can connect to the spiritual experience of what that artist was trying to convey. And part of the reason I fell in love with Van Gogh's Starry Night was because I tried to imagine, what was it like for Van Gogh to paint that painting? If you look at it, it's not exactly a replication of what the night sky looks like. But if you open yourself up to what he was trying to say about the turmoil in his soul and in his spirit and everything that he was trying to put out in the only way that he knew how, which was on paint on canvas, you can connect to him and connect to God through him. And I realized in this sort of major epiphany, that's Torah. Torah are these amazingly human stories written in human language about the human condition, but that if you open yourself up wide enough, those stories can transport you to the spiritual awareness that whoever the author was trying to convey. And through that, you can find portals of entry to discover what God is. And for me, it was that sort of realization that the Torah can be written by God through a human hand that totally transformed the way that I thought of Torah. Do you ever sort of get to a point where you kind of realize this book is actually holy? Are there texts that sort of remind you this book is holy? It's not Moby Dick. It's not just another great work of literature. It's something transcendent or beyond that.
Absolutely. I think the book itself, I love when we lift up with Hagbang Lila, we lift up the Torah and we see the text. I think those are the moments that you're reminded of the calligraphy of it, the idea that someone sat there and wrote each letter very intentionally and soulfully. Those are those moments that you remember these stories are not just a guide or a compass or a story about people, but it's a story that reflects our ability to find holiness in our everyday lives. I'm struck right now as you were talking about your own experience, because I think Torah and Jewish learning help us to form relationship, and we can create really powerful relationships with other people through the engagement of studying Torah. And I'm struck by the B'Tselem Elohim, by the idea that we are created in the image of God. As you were speaking, it reminded me, we to start a family, we had to go through IVF, through in vitro fertilization. And I always think about the text about creation of man and how God engages in this conversation with the angels that we are going to create human beings in our image. And the process that goes through the creation of man, of pulling together the earth and creating Adam through the Adamah, through the earth, that there's this real tangible experience that God has created, and what that takes. And for me personally, to be able to bring life into this world needed a little more help, right? We needed the hands of doctors and the insight and the compassion and the empathy of nurses. And when we were doing the transfer, we were blessed with just one embryo. And I'll never forget getting the call from the doctor saying, "We only have one embryo. What do you want to do?" And I said, "This is our blessing. I just know it. I have a good feeling. Like this is our baby." And when we went through the transfer, I asked the doctor, at the moment before you transfer the embryo, "Can I recite a prayer?" And he said, "Absolutely." And this wasn't a Jewish doctor, and no one else in the operating room was Jewish. It was just me and Will and the nurses and the doctor. And you're watching on the screen this moment. And he says, "Okay, now's the time." And so I uttered words of prayer from my own heart. And I remember in that prayer, I thanked God for inviting me to partner with God in the work of creation. And in that moment, everyone in the operating room said, "Amen." And we were blessed with our baby. And to me, like that Torah of that moment, that connection that I forged with these people, the doctors and the nurses that I didn't have a connection really with before, we all came together, different places, different experiences, different upbringings. And yet in that moment, we shared a word, we shared a sentiment, we shared a living, breathing Torah that will forever bond me to them. So, is the book holy? Like, yeah, the book is holy. And the book elevates moments in my own life, in the moment, in the lives of so many people, that we can remember to say, yes, I love to grapple with the text. I love to think about a group of people sitting in a room trying to say, like, how am I going to create that Exodus story? What are we going to say about the moment in Deuteronomy where Moses is given this gift of being able to share and reflect on the entire journey, and then grant us the ability through Devarim to actually engage with God on our own without an intermediary, and to know that the prayers of our own hearts are just as powerful as the words written in our prayer book. All of those pieces of it are so incredible, and they offer us the ability to say, this book can travel with me. I can wrestle with it. I can grapple with it. I can challenge it. But in the end, it's because of its holiness and the sacredness of it that I can do that.
Wow, that's such an incredible and powerful story. And I think about so many times when, in my own life and in the life of the members of our congregation, when a particular teaching or word was kind of what they needed in that moment. I think about the amazing story of the death of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, and how his handmaid was grappling because she didn't want him to die. And she saw all of his students were praying that he would live, and their prayers were so strong that they kept his soul here in this world. And so she prayed, "May the prayers of those below be stronger than those above," that the angels who were ready for him to come and be with his creator. But then she started to see his suffering, and she started to see his agony, and she changed her prayer to say, "May the prayers of those above be stronger than those below." And she went on the roof to just sort of vent her frustration. She took this clay vessel that she was holding and threw it to the ground, and it landed with this huge crash. And in the moment that it crashed, all the students stopped their prayers to see what had happened. And the moment they stopped praying, he died. And so the rabbis teach from that you should hope for life so long as there is hope for life. But when there is no longer hope for life, you can remove the obstacles from letting that natural process go forward. And I think about how many times I've shared that story with members of the congregation who had to decide, are we going to turn off these machines? Are we going to let the natural process just go forward? Are we ready to let go of this person that we love? And there's so many times in which the experience of our sages from thousands of years ago mirrors our own experience in our own lifetime. And through their experience, we're able to find our own resonances that kind of help us in our own path to healing. I'm so touched by what you shared. And in the ways that Torah doesn't have to be just the 5 books, that Torah is in many ways the experiences of our lives and the way in which we choose to look at our experience of life through those lenses of our dialogue with God. One of the things that I love most about Jewish learning is the fact that there isn't just one right answer, that there's a multiplicity of voices. Tell me sort of how you experience being part of what they call machloket, that divine conversation or argument that sometimes takes place as to how to understand a text.
It's one of the things I love about the Talmud. I think my Talmud class in rabbinical school was just such an amazing experience. And I love that at the bottom of the page, I mean, the page is full of conversation and debate and commentary around the page, but then there's no one line at the end. This is how you will do it. And I love that. I love the Shammai Hillel. I love the discussion between the two houses and how they see the world differently. And I find that in my classes. And one of the things I love about adult Jewish learning that I fell in love with over my past few years, where I had the privilege of focusing my attention on that experience, is that the people in the room came from so many different lived experience that they are now at a point in their lives where they were studying and engaging with Jewish tradition and wisdom for the pure purpose of enjoyment. There was no milestone marker. They weren't prepping for anything in particular. They were looking to fill their soul with the learning of Judaism. And I found that those conversations were so inspired. They saw the text from a place of having lived, in many different places and experiencing many different opportunities and raising families or not raising families, having long careers or, volunteerism and all these different things that they approach the text in ways that I hadn't had that opportunity before. And I love that Judaism provides that arena for machloket, for discussion, for debate in a way that is sacred debate, right? For the sake of heaven, that we're going to have this platform to say, we're going to take this text and you may think it one way, you may see it from a different place, but it's that the beauty in that dialogue that I think Judaism not just provides, but encourages. I've always found that to be enriching. That's what makes Jewish learning to me something that, even though the words are the words forever, that the experience is different every single time. And I think that's really fascinating.
And for me, I think what I really love about learning is the fact that I not only get to know the text and the participants that come from the text, I get to know the person who's across from me. And I think some of my most important relationships that I've had have been with study partners. And I really look forward to having you as our study partner, as part of our congregation and our community, God willing, for many, many years to come. Laila, it's been great having you with us today. The Essential Questions podcast has been made possible by the Temple Beth Jewish Ideas Incubator, committed to creativity and innovation in modern Jewish life. Many thanks to our production team, Jason Reeser, Amanda Brenzel, and Susan Stallone. You can find this podcast on Apple Music, Spotify, and the Podbean app, as well as on Temple Bethel's website, tbeboca.org/essential questions. Share this podcast with your friends, rate us on Apple Podcast or Spotify to spread the word. And we want to know, what are your essential questions? Let us know by emailing us at eq@tbeboca.org. I'm Rabbi Dan Levin, and thanks for listening to the Essential Questions podcast.